afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kirsty Suter, and these are my colleagues Nicholas Bennett and Simon Huskin. We are members of the newly formed CSR committee at Barter Enterprises, an Australian company. We are here today to present you, the board of Barter Enterprises. We're here to talk about a significant ethical issue that's facing the company, which has both legal and financial ramifications. Before I get started, though, with the substance of the presentation, I'd like to begin by asking you a question. Just a rhetorical question. Just have a think about it. And the question is this: what do you understand by the term free to roam? I'll use it in a sentence to illustrate. Barter's chickens are free to roam. Do you think it means what you see in the picture there? Chickens frolicking around in green fields under the sunshine? Or is the phrase more reflective of what you see in the second picture? Chickens living in a shed, but with some space to move outdoors. Or finally, do you think it means what you see in the third picture there? Thousands of chickens crammed into a single space with very little space to move around. According to Barter Enterprises' own advertising campaign, the answer is the picture you see in A. However, the conditions in which Barter's chickens are actually kept are far more similar to what you see in the third picture there. And this is the problem that we're going to be talking about today. Barter Enterprises is being sued by the Australian consumer watchdog, which is claiming that Barter's advertising is misleading and deceptive, which is in contravention of Australian consumer law. In particular, the consumer watchdog is claiming that the phrase free to roam, which was used in Barter's advertising, is misleading and deceptive. This litigation is costly, and it's also threatening Barter's brand, consumer confidence in Barter's brand. What's more, it highlights a much broader issue of increasing consumer concern about ethical issues relating to animal welfare, and also growing consumer trends towards cruelty-free products. We are going to recommend to you today that Barter take 3 key steps. Firstly, we're going to recommend that Barter settle the litigation to avoid incurring further legal costs and also get certainty. Secondly, to prevent something like this from happening again, we're going to recommend that Barter implement an ethical oversight mechanism to make sure that any future advertising campaigns go through a CSR committee that checks the facts and makes sure that what's represented in the advertisements is accurate. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we're going to recommend that Barter adapt its farming practices to meet consumer expectations and secure Barter's place as a leader in the ethical food market. Just to give you a bit of background about the company, Barter, as you may have gathered, is in the chicken business. It breeds, processes, and distributes meat chickens. It's the second largest poultry producer in Australia, with about 4,500 employees across its vertically integrated business. So what's happened? Well, the facts in the case are quite simple, and I've already alluded to them. Barter is being sued by the Australian consumer watchdog, the ACCC, on the basis that certain claims it made in its print advertising and product packaging were misleading and deceptive. False and misleading advertising is prohibited under Australian consumer law, and companies that contravene these provisions can face significant penalties. Barter produced about 500 copies of the poster you see on the slide there. They distributed these copies to retailers across the country that sold their chicken products, and those retailers displayed these advertisements. You probably can't read the writing at the bottom, but it says, quote, "free to roam in large open sheds, no cages," in caps. Now, the reality was something quite different to what you would expect based on that advertisement that you just saw. Barter grows chickens in massive sheds, each housing about 30 to 40,000 birds. When the birds are first collected for slaughter, and they're about 33 days old, the average stocking density is 18 birds per square metre. Barter has been charged under two main provisions of the Australian Consumer Law. The first states that a corporation shall not, in trade or commerce, engage in conduct that is misleading or deceptive, or is likely to mislead or deceive. The second provision, I've just summarised there, but essentially it says a corporation shall not falsely represent that its goods, in this case chickens, are of a particular quality, standard, value, etc., or have a particular history. In assessing whether conduct has been misleading or deceptive, a court will look at the overall impression created by the conduct and what's implied by the conduct. It's important to note that there's no legal definition of this phrase free to roam, but I think that common sense would suggest that what you saw in this picture here did not accurately, or by no means accurately, reflected what actually happens in real life. Barter isn't the only company to have had proceedings brought against it. Two of its major competitors have also been charged, and one of those competitors pleaded guilty. They settled the litigation. The settlement required them to essentially do four things. They had to pay a $100,000 fine. They had to remove the advertisements that were misleading from these retail stores around the country. They had to publish an advertisement in a popular national newspaper, setting out what happened in the proceedings and what the outcome of the litigation was, so essentially publicly admitting their guilt. And finally, they were required to implement a training and compliance program to make sure that their employees were aware of consumer law and nothing of the sort would happen again. Barter itself could face a much greater penalty if it proceeds with the litigation. The maximum penalty for each contravention is $1.1 million, and given that there may have been several contraventions, we're looking at a several million dollar fine, potentially. Another thing to consider is ongoing legal costs. It's going to be very expensive to continue to defend this litigation, and if Barter loses, it will also have to pay the cost of the ACCC. Whilst the legal issues are pertinent, one of the most concerning things about this litigation is the reputational consequences for Barter and the impact that it could have on the Barter brand. Now up there I've put, several, I've listed all the newspapers where articles about this litigation appeared. And these are major newspapers in Australia. Some of the newspapers even ran entire page articles on the proceedings. And in each of those articles, Barter Enterprises was specifically named as one of the defendants. So with that thought in mind, I'm now going to hand over to Nicholas, who will discuss the ethical issues and the business case of becoming more ethical in more detail. Thank you.
A wise chicken once said, ethics is the difference between knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is actually right to do. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to begin by asking what is actually at stake here, ethically speaking. Isn't this just another instance where a company presents an idealized version of what they are actually selling? How is it that a picture can matter so much? Well, to start with, images are the most powerful form of moral argumentation. They have a capacity to shock, to startle, to change behavior in a way that mere words often do not. There are even moral philosophers today who make this precisely this point, a concession that should be all the more pertinent and meaningful given that the jobs of these people consist solely in the use of words. A practical example of this is a British documentary in 2009, which showcased the lives of battery hens and subsequently saw a significant decline in battery egg sales in the months following the broadcast. So it seems clear to conclude that if the actual images of barter chickens were displayed, sales would subsequently decrease. But instead of letting consumers respond to the truth of what they are actually buying, barter is not only concealing that truth, but actively inverting it. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because of the changing ethical climate in which our market operates. Animal welfare is no longer a marginal issue. It is one that people across all sectors of society are concerned about, and in increasing numbers. Consumers today are placing more and more value on ethical consumption across all kinds of goods and services, but especially when it comes to food. According to the UK RSPCA, 59% of British residents in 2009 agreed with the statements that minimising animal suffering is important to them. This is a clear majority, and it also represents a substantial increase on the 48% who agreed with that statement in 2007. This also translates into consumer trends. 4 out of every 5 consumers say that animal welfare is an important consideration when choosing which meat products to buy. Of course, you could ask the question, isn't this just something that people would say to an interviewer in order to come across as more ethically conscious than they actually are? But these claims are actually borne out by real consumption trends. Free-range chicken alone has seen a roughly 500% increase in sales in the 10 years to 2009. This is despite numerous scientific studies showing that there are no or very limited health and nutritional benefits to buying free range. People buy free range out of a concern for animal welfare. But of course, Barton knows these facts already. These growing trends in ethical consumption can hardly come as news. Yet instead of responding to this demand by improving the care that they actually provide to their chickens, Barton has instead chosen to obscure the reality of what it is that they do. This is ethically problematic for 2 clear reasons. First and foremost, it means that Barton's relationship with its customers is built on dishonesty, on an obfuscation of the truth. This comes at a time when companies are placing ever greater emphasis on openness and transparency. They are doing this firstly because consumers are demanding more information and accountability from corporations. But they are also doing so because ultimately it is the right and responsible thing to do. After all, what kind of company wants to have to hide the reality of its products just in order to increase sales? This is not simply a question of concealing the truth, however. There's more at stake. What is even worse is that barter is actively preventing people from following their own ethical principles. People are buying barter chickens in the belief that they have been raised with a high standard of care and attention to their welfare. Our customers have the right to make their own ethically informed consumption choices. We should not withhold the information for them to make those decisions in the first place. Given these facts, we can see the current lawsuit as facing barter at a kind of ethical crossroads. How barter responds to legal proceedings is not just a financial decision. It also has far-reaching consequences, far-reaching ethical consequences, and ultimately, it can be seen as raising a searching question about corporate identity, challenging barter in terms of the values and ideals that it sees at the heart of its corporate mission. So let's see what's actually at stake in barter's decision about whether or not to fight the case. It's true that if barter fights, they may actually have a chance of winning. They could potentially avoid costs associated with settlement or losing the case, and they could continue to run their advertising campaign as we've just seen. And in ethical terms, one could at least attempt to justify this in saying that barter is simply trying to act in the best interests of its shareholders by trying to avoid unnecessary costs. But this line of argumentation misses a key opportunity for barter to reflect on the ethics of its behavior. Furthermore, it completely overlooks the increasingly ethically conscious nature of today's marketplace. where consumers are placing an ever greater emphasis on corporate transparency and accountability. Under such circumstances, the reputational damage to barter enterprises will be significant. As Kirsty has demonstrated, the media coverage of this case has already been substantial, and thus it looks likely that even if barter is not found to have acted misleadingly in the eyes of the court, in the eyes of the public, the case has already been made. Now, let's take a moment to consider why exactly it is that transparency matters so much in this industry. You will all no doubt recall the horsemeat scandal that struck the UK just a few months ago. Meat products, marketed as beef, were found instead to contain a high proportion of horse DNA. This proved particularly disastrous for the UK's largest supermarket chain, Tesco, which was found to be selling high volumes of horsemeat products marketed as beef. Transparency is an important principle for any business, but the stakes are even higher in the food industry. Tesco's market share is now at an 8-year low, and its brand value has fallen by 2% in a matter of months. By contrast, its competitors, who came out of the horsemeat scandal comparatively unscathed, have made significant gains. The supermarket chain Marks & Spencer's has seen a 5% gain in brand value, and likewise, Sainsbury's, another supermarket, has increased its market share by 6.2%. Now, why exactly is it that there has been such a strong market reaction to this? After all, horsemeat is perfectly acceptable among many of Britain's neighbouring countries, including the great culinary nations of France and Italy. It poses no danger to health, and apparently it tastes no different from beef. Well, what people are objecting to, above all, is the dishonesty. Consumers want to make informed decisions about what it is that they are eating, and they will not tolerate having that autonomy taken away from them. So in view of these facts, we should consider the option of settling. Admittedly, this could lead to some short-term reputational damage and associated costs, but it also provides, more fundamentally, the opportunity for a fresh start. It allows barter to re-examine its past decisions and to reorient itself toward the future by making a gesture of good faith towards its consumers and by placing a renewed emphasis on transparency, openness, and accountability. In essence, then, this can be understood as a question of corporate identity. It allows barter the chance to restore its reputation, but it also poses the more fundamental question of what kind of company it is that barter actually wants to be. This is not just a question about honesty and accountability and transparency. In practical terms, it also challenges barter to think about whether, instead of simply misleading its consumers to meet their expectations about the humane treatment of animals, it could instead simply change the way it treats its chickens in the first place. Can and should barter take immediate practical steps to reform its farming practices in view of this increasingly ethical marketplace? We argue that they should. Why should they do this? Because to do so would allow barter to get ahead of the game and embrace these new ethical consumption habits. Across all sectors of society, a greater emphasis and concern for animal well-being is being displayed. Work on animal consciousness in science and philosophy is matched by greater legal measures protecting animals and also by moves within the meat industry itself. In Australia, for example, the pork industry has vowed to phase out sow stalls by 2017. The reason that they gave for this was, in their own words, an increasing concern, a growing unrest among consumers about the industry. It would therefore seem prudent for barter to start making similar moves regarding the ethical treatment of its chickens. Moreover, evidence suggests that there is actually a strong market for this, and one that is highly profitable. Ethically produced foods are now becoming both increasingly popular, while still commanding higher profit margins than alternate products. This itself is amply demonstrated by the case of free-range eggs, which in the UK have now for the first time become more popular than cage eggs. Not only are they selling in larger numbers than ever before, but according to the European Commission, the profit margin on a caged egg, on a free-range egg, is approximately twice that over a battery egg. It's important, again, to bear in mind here that free-range eggs are no more healthy or nutritious than caged alternatives. People simply want to be able to feel good about their consumption choices, and they are willing to pay a premium to do so. Bart should use that willingness to its own advantage. Another clear parallel is the organic food market. This is an industry that has seen remarkable expansion over recent years. In the United States alone, sales of organic food have increased from $1 billion in 1990 through to $26.7 billion in 2010. They even recorded 7.7% growth in sales in 2009, a year when the financial crisis was in full swing. Consumers are turning to organic food not just for health and sustainability reasons, but because they find it to be trustworthy and to follow higher ethical standards than alternatives. Evidence for this can be seen in the fact that sales of organic meat in the UK went up by 8.4% in February over January this year, largely in response to the horse meat scandal. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of these facts, I would now like to hand over to Simon to present our solutions.
To address the problems explained by Nicholas and Kirsty, we recommend a comprehensive, tiered solution that will allow BART to cut its losses from the incident, prevent it from happening again, and help BART to adapt to a changing meat market. To this end, we will present recommendations for the short-term, mid-term, and long-term. In the short term, BART ought to cease legal proceedings and settle the case. In doing so, it would follow the example of one of its competitors who already settled their respective suit. This action will firstly have financial consequences. It keeps BART from spending more money than it already has on legal fees, and it replaces an unknown risk, the possible cost of losing the case, with a known one, the cost of a settlement. That means that settling a case is the financially conservative thing to do. There's also the ethical thing to do. Looking at the discrepancy between advertisements that BART ran and reality, it is clear that BART has been misleading its customers about the origins of its products. The settlement sets an example that BART is committed towards to its corporate social responsibility towards its customers. Such a settlement would furthermore not only serve to rebuild trust with our customers, but also prevent further reputational damage during the trial. By settling the case, BART can establish itself as a company that is concerned for its customers and seeks to disaffiliate itself from any ethical misconduct. It is important that no matter how the case may go, public perception will be that BART misled its customers, and then they either got away with it or they got caught. The legal case may go on and we may try to fight it, but the PR case was lost when the first newspapers printed pictures of the realities inside BART's barns. A settlement will also contain much less detail than a court ruling. In a settlement, BART essentially admits to wrongdoing, but they don't need to explain what exactly they're doing wrong and how the chain reaction kept. In a court ruling, on the other hand, the judge will have to minutely explain what practices in particular led to his or her decision, and that could lead to even more uncomfortable detailed surfacing that might damage BART's reputation. The next step then, in the midterm, is to institute a system of common sense fact-checking for new advertisements. A CSR officer that is to be designated will look over new advertisements and marketing campaigns before they're released, and that checkup will be on a level of the legal checkup that ensures compliance with the law. The CSR officer will ensure that the claims made in the advertisements are consistent with actual practices. They will in particular ensure that they are correct as they are understood by the average customer. We will be sure to train the officers appropriately for this task. By adopting this practice of common sense fact-checking, BART can protect itself from any accusations that they are accidentally or purposely misleading the customers. And it is an important step in establishing BART as a brand that can be trusted. In the long term, we believe it is important for BART to reevaluate its practice of chicken farming in general, and then move to adapt to a changing meat market. As Nicholas has pointed out, BART's current business model is not sustainable in the long run. from a legal point of view, more and more laws have been passed that restrict how animals in general and chicken in particular may be kept, cutting dangerously close to Barta's business model. Furthermore, Nicholas has shown that there already is widespread public support for animal welfare and that the support is increasing. Some other companies, in particular supermarkets, have already moved to adapt free-range only policies, and Barta needs to follow suit. Barta's business model may work now and may continue to work for a couple of years, but it is not sustainable in the long run. We're not recommending that Barta overhaul its production chain overnight, but it needs to be aware of the changing climate in the ethical food market and prepare to adapt to it. Some of Barta's competitors, organized in the Australian Poultry Industry Association, short APIA, have moved to propose a new certificate for free-range poultry. That certificate, however, was mostly poor attempt at appeasing the customer. It drew heavy criticism from customer rights organizations who labeled the standards outlined in the certificate insufficient and even misleading. The APIA, in light of those criticisms, then withdrew the application for the certificate. And I believe this case shows that it's no longer enough to simply try to bewitch the customer with more bold slogans, more pretty advertisements, more certificates, but that an actual change is needed in how chicken is produced. Barta needs to start taking these demands seriously now if it wants to continue being a major player in the poultry market tomorrow. In summary, we recommend that Barta settle the case now to cut its losses, then modify the process of creating advertisements to prevent such a case from happening again, and then move to adapt to a more ethical food market of tomorrow. Do you have any questions on these issues?
I believe my fellow board members do have some questions.
I have a couple of comments. Watch your typos. You have some typos on your presentation. Just so there were a couple of typos. Have you thought about, you talk about free range. How is the industry really going to, how are you really going to take care of the definition of free range when it doesn't really take into it, it's not better for you. So how are you going to deal with that? Because really free range isn't more nutritious. Are you going to be more upfront with the consumer about that? When you're advertising, you're saying free range?
We believe that the choice of action is to move to free range not because it is more nutritious or more healthy, but because it is the more ethical way of keeping animals. And we believe the consumer demand for free range poultry and free range eggs isn't due to their being more nutritious and more healthy, but because the consumer cares about the ethical treatment of animals. So you said that free range is not very well defined. There is a problem right now. Interestingly, in light of the certificate that was proposed by the APIA, and after it was withdrawn, the Australian government has now started to establish their own standards for free range to bring clarity to the market. And that is one of the things that we believe Barta needs to be prepared for in the next couple of years.
And if I could just add to that, Barta should certainly not use the term free to roam in its advertisements going forward until we are absolutely sure that our consumers are, the treatment of the chickens is commensurate with what our consumers believe the term free to roam actually means. So I think the litigation itself indicates that what we think, or what some people think free to roam means, by no means is what the average consumer thinks free to roam means. So in the short term, we would just not use that phrase until, as Simon said, clear regulations or clear definitions were introduced as to what the term means. So ideally, no misleading, but going forward, we would like to reconsider farming practices.
So would we be, as a company, would we be honest with the consumer and tell them that our chickens live in cramped sheds? Is that what you're suggesting? You're suggesting honesty, or are you suggesting dishonesty by not saying the truth?
I don't think it's one or the other. We're suggesting that currently the meaning of free to roam, well, the term free to roam perhaps does not reflect how our chickens are kept. We can't change our farming practices overnight. We're also suggesting that we try to change our farming practices to make them more relate closer to what the consumer would expect, how they expect a chicken to actually be kept. So we recognize that we can't change the way our chickens are farmed overnight. In the short term, we're going to stop any possibility of misleading our consumers. We're not going to run ads like that anymore. And then in the longer term, we will try to improve farming practices to make them comply with what consumers expect.
So in the short term, we're going to solve our problems by settling the lawsuit and changing or withdrawing our advertising.
Yeah, and importantly, you brought up putting images of the actual elephants in cages, the barns. I don't think that's a necessary consequence of that. If you go to a supermarket and consider buying caged eggs, you won't find pictures of caged hens on there. You simply find a great box with caged hens. And we believe there are two separate problems to be addressing here. One is how the chicken actually kept, and the other one is the issue of misleading and advertising. And I don't think you do. I think it is an ethical thing to do to simply not advertise your chicken a certain way, and you certainly do not have an obligation to ensure that any negative features of the product are as scathing and as obvious as possible to your customer.
What would take the place of the advertising about free to roam or free range? Would it be nutrition or nutritious meat or something of that nature instead of free to roam?
Well, I think for starters, we simply wouldn't use the term free to roam. We would say that our chickens are raised in a barn, as opposed to in cages. They are cage free. They're not kept in little cages like that. So I think we would just have to be honest to the extent we can. Just say that, not even to the extent we can, just be honest and say our chickens are not kept in cages. They are grown in a barn. But as Simon said, I don't think there's a need to put big pictures of what the barns look like. It's not the way advertising would be.
John, excuse me, we have some other board members.
I want to detail on this. What if we just cut a hole in the back of the barn, shed, whatever we want to call it, building, sarcophagus? We let them just go outside for a little bit. Would you be okay? Would we be okay with that?
I think actually that's what happens currently. I think the reason why we have been calling our chickens free to roam up until now is that technically they do have a little hole that allows them access to outside. In reality, the chickens don't use that access. Maybe a couple would, but they have essentially no space to even kind of get to their food and water in some cases. So I don't think that would be acceptable because it would be misleading.
Now, I know for a fact that some of us on the board of directors are free to roam or choose to stay in California. And I think you've missed the humor in our advertising. When we hired the Cambridge advertising agency to come in and advise us, we never for a minute imagined that our chickens would be lying on the Bondi Beach in lounge chairs. That was humor. Are we to forget our humanity, to forget our humor? Advertising is, I thought, was really fun.
Well, it can be funny indeed when it's aware of the realities and aware of what it actually looks like. But as an average consumer who's looking to advertising, especially in the context of a slogan of free to roam, and kind of seeks to understand what does free to roam actually mean, I believe it is obvious that the impression they will get from that kind of advertising is that the chicken has space. And I believe we ought to consider what the average consumer thinks about the advertising and not what some funny people in the Cambridge advertising
But
agency thought.
chickens form flocks. They like each other.
But in this case, it's leading to instances of chicken cannibalism, which we feel is not exactly an expression of a fraction of our chickens.
I think consumers want to know. I mean, if they're buying free-to-roam meat instead of cage meat, or non-cage eggs versus cage eggs, whatever example you want to take, they're making an ethical choice. They see pictures of happy chickens and they feel good that chickens have been raised in a decent environment. Their welfare needs have been respected. So whether the poster is humorous or not, I think the general impression it's intended to convey is that barter chickens are happy. But the reality is, it's completely different. As you saw in the picture there, they have no space to move. Some of them, like I said, can't even access food and water, and they're not happy chickens. And the reason we have advertising like that is because we want to lead our customers to believe that our chickens are happy and we treat them well, so they should buy our chickens. And that's where we have been unethical.
First of all, thank you. 2 questions. Can you kind of recap the dollars for a couple of the paths you suggested? That's number 1. Number 2, you suggested changing the way the farms are raised. That would be a structural change for the organization. Do you have any thoughts on that or further details?
Well, looking at the dollar amounts, well, for the short term, as Kirsty talked about earlier, the cost of settlement that one of our competitors achieved was about $100,000 for settlement, and then the cost of buying a couple of advertising, which is comparatively cheap, judging by barter size and revenue. The cost of losing the case would be somewhere between 1 and 10 million, depending on how many provisions they're found guilty of, plus maybe another million in legal fees to be paid for the ACCC on the other side. But that is a cost that we don't necessarily incur when losing the case. Having instituting the common sense fact checking, our solution for the midterm is the cost of one CSR officer looking over advertising, which is I would argue negligible in the larger scheme of things. You're looking at one person hiring something like 80,000.
So what's the annual sales of the company?
The annual
Total revenue is around $670 million.
And you're talking about the structural changes in the long run. The structural changes are not as substantial in the long run. I mean, it is not like overhauling production changes, asking our farmers to use a little more land, to keep the chicken in a little more space, which is more expensive. I'll grant you that. But to give you any comparison from the realm of free of egg production, the cost of producing a caged egg as opposed to the cost of producing a free-range egg, the difference is about 2 cents per egg, which isn't all that much. And we're confident that barter can change its production method without taking substantial cuts.
Yeah, sorry, just feeding on from that example. So cage eggs, 2 cents less to make than free-range eggs or non-cage eggs, and yet free-range eggs sell for twice the amount that cage eggs do. And we heard earlier that in the last couple of years, for the first time ever, people are now buying more cage-free eggs than cage eggs. So even if the costs to actually change our production methods are relatively significant upfront, I think there's a lot of money to be made in this market in the long term. I think we need to think long term in this industry.
Looking at your 3 steps, settle, back check, and then change the chicken farming. You guys already said today that the first 2 we're going to take a brand hit for. I mean, we've already taken it. Once that first picture came out, we took it. So if we settle and we start doing the fact checking, we've taken the brand hit. You think we can go from that brand hit? So why would we go and start changing our production? If we've already taken the brand hit, that, let's be honest, is going to fade after a point. Once the store's gone and then settled, I'm not going to keep coming back to the newspapers aren't going to keep coming back. Why would we change something when we've already had a brand hit already?
Well, we don't have them just taking the brand hit from when the case was originally picked up. There's also the difference between the brand hit party will take once they possibly lose the case, and we personally believe it's likely that they will lose the case. If the company is found guilty in court, that's a big story. If a company seeks a settlement, that's a small story. The competitor that settled got away from it compared to that little brand damage. But you are right, the damage is done. There's some damage done so far, and that is a difficulty the department has overcome when it seeks to adapt to a more ethical market in a sense. And we don't think it's merely an issue of reputation that Bart is facing in the long run, but an issue of customers simply stopping to buy poultry that is not free range, and Australian government might very well pass one of the last laws that prevent Bart from producing the chicken in the way it does right now.
Yeah, and it's not just a matter of the newspapers coming back. As you said, they'll get bored. It's about the consumers coming back. Will the consumers come back and buy our brand? If we have to get rid of the sign, the advertising phrase "free to roam," and our competitors have "free to roam" on their packaging, and consumers care about the treatment of chickens, which chicken product are they going to buy? And as we
But your competitors have already settled. I mean, no one's going to ever say free to roam again. I can say that right now. I mean, no one's ever going to say that because people have been sued and have lost. So, yeah, I just feels like we could just settle and we can back check and we can move forward with our business, and we don't need to make drastic changes because, you know, the damage that this has done has already occurred. And so, you know.
We didn't address this specifically in the presentation, but the other business risk that we can face if we don't start making these changes is our big supermarket customers may just not want to buy our products anymore. So this has already happened. The major supermarket chains in Australia have said to specifically pork producers, we are not going to buy your pork products unless you get rid of your sow stalls. And so it may not actually be up to us at the end of the day. Our major customers may say to us, listen, our customers, our retail customers want free range chickens. They want their chickens to be treated well. If you can't provide us with that, then we'll go somewhere else. So I think, yeah, there's definitely a case to be made.
Is there an actual offer to the company to settle for a specific amount of money that's pending? Or are you saying that other companies have settled for an approximate amount of money and we should do a similar deal?
We're saying that one of our competitors has settled for $100,000 and the other penalties that we listed. We don't have an offer on the table to settle because up until now we've wanted to fight the litigation. But I think we could come to a similar kind of deal.
How much would you suggest we settle for? What would be the max? What would be the minimum? Should we pay $1 million?
I think we could use the 100,000 as a good guide as to what at least the ACCC would be willing to settle for. I suspect they wouldn't let us get away with it for 100,000 because we have pushed them. We've made them incur additional legal fees. I would say anywhere between 150 to 200,000. I think that would be a reasonable settlement amount, but we'd also have to comply, I suspect, with the other penalties.
Nicholas, how does one measure chicken happiness?
Chicken happiness, I suppose, I guess it's easiest to start by asking what chicken unhappiness looks like. And I think we've already seen animal pictures of that. So I think our starting point is
Well, that's actually people unhappiness with seeing those images. How do you know that chickens are unhappy?
whether they don't actually like that.
Yeah.
Well, there are studies about the psychological stress that chickens suffer under these environments. I mentioned just briefly the instance of chicken cannibalism, which I feel is simply a response to the stress and the unpleasantness and the starvation or maltreatment that they can suffer.
But if they're out running, hawks can attack them, kill them.
It could happen.
We're saving them from the predators.
It could happen, but also we're placing them in circumstances where they would not really like to be if we left them alone. If you say that chickens flock together, this is true, but they don't flock together to the extent of 18 chickens per square meter. That just doesn't happen out in nature. Admittedly, we are preventing them from being slaughtered by the occasional hawk, but we're not exactly preventing them from being slaughtered in the end, and we're certainly not making the lives that they lead any more stress-free or pleasant or calm or happy, and certainly not in the way that advertising suggested. So chicken happiness is we're not simply anthropomorphizing them. These are actual experiences that they suffer.
If we pay the 200,000 and let's say 10 years go by and we're sued again, we'll just pay another 200,000?
So you said, and then 10 years later we get.
Well, as soon as we're sued again for some unknown reason, but we just pay them off too, because we're rolling with the devil.
You mean getting sued for a similar case of misleading advertising or?
Yeah, somebody's gonna find something though.
Well, you can't settle every case like that. In the case of misleading advertising, it is somewhat easy to do because there's in a way an easy way of reverting damages done. But we do not wish to make recommendations for Barter's long-term legal strategy, and we don't wish to make recommendations for how Barter should act in all legal matters in general, but only in this particular case.
You have time for one more question?
I'm just curious. So you're the CSR committee, right? So are you going to continue with the company to help them move forward with what they're doing? Or is this just a one-time shot? Are you going to work with the advertising agency? Well, I don't know why you're advertising in the first place. I mean, just because I would stop it altogether. From a PR standpoint, I would stop it. But are you going to continue? Because I know a lot of companies in the U.S. have their CSR committees that continue. So are you continuing to work with them and, see that they do things even though they might fire you? Or how are you going to deal with this? Is it upper level? Is the board hiring you? That's what I want to know. Are you continuing? Are you going to work with the executives to help them move on? What is your role going to be?
Well, in short, yes. So the board hired us. I suppose this litigation really brought these ethical problems into focus, and the board really had to look again at, I suppose, Barter's ethical, stance on things, and so hired us as the CSR committee to come into the company and really look at advertising, look at farming practices, look at consumer expectation, and start to try and change things. So yes, we're here for the future going forward, and we'll do what we can to really try and improve Barter and try and sell Barter as an ethical company to its consumers.
Good. Take a deep breath. It's over.
It was fun.
Good. So we get to now share with you some impressions of your presentation and style. Would you like to start?
Okay. I thought you were very good. I do think you need to check your slides.
Can I ask a question
Yes.
about that? Was it some spelling issues?
Yeah.
And was it English?
Like Phil. I don't know. How do you
Is it-
spell
there's
Phil?
English
There's a
spelling.
different spelling.
Yeah.
Okay.
English.
It's just F-E-L, F-I-L?
Yeah, I think.
And I have
English and
trouble
American
working for an
spelling is
English
different.
company.
That's funnily enough, we had to argue
Okay,
about
and
this
the
because
word
it showed up no
and
spell checker.
And lawsuit is 2 words for you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm a superior lawyer.
Okay.
It's funny how you said that, actually, because we actually had a debate about the word fulfill, and we looked it up in several dictionaries and decided which, had to make a call on 1 or 2 L's.
Whether it's with a Z or an S.
Yeah, okay, just because we've seen other slides with it.
No, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ended up being a bit of a mix.
Yeah, I thought you did a great job. I think you, fellas, okay, I'm not gonna pick on anybody, I just said, don't look at your notes so much. I mean, I could see you kept looking down. Look at the audience, a little bit more compelling and convincing rather than, I thought you were giving a speech. And you want to convince the board what you're doing. And just think about that. And from your PR standpoint, you're right on the branding. I mean, you need to get this rebranded, and I just think you've got the right thing going with that, and you're thinking, because, yeah, it could happen again, but branding's really important. I would assume it's important in Australia, because it is in the US.
It is, it's very important.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I thought you did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Eric, why don't we come this way and we'll come back to you.
Yeah, burn the notes. Get rid of them. They were distracting me. Yeah, I don't know all my colleagues, but I just throw them away. I like the slides. I like the question you asked us at the beginning. That caught my attention. I was thinking number 2, but I already knew number 3 was going to probably be the case. The topic, part of me wants to, we're talking about branding, I'm thinking just change the name of the company, start fresh. And part of me wanted to ask you, why don't we just literally cut that division out, farm it out to someone else, we're not responsible for that. Because I'm thinking of costs, so maybe I can save money, increase my profit share, go into that side of the business, everything looks hunky-dory, and everything is smiling. Like the voice, and like the transition, we work on the transition. That's about it. Thank you.
Very logical, right? Very logically oriented, very detailed in terms of how it was presented, and it's very persuasive. But that was the best of the day in terms of the logic behind it. I'd like to see you more excited about the subject. But very well done.
One thing that really stuck out in my mind is I like seeing the solution up front. So one thing that personally I like to see, so now I know where we're going with this, and
Yeah.
so a lot of the questions that I might have are gone. I think the part that I had trouble with was there's kind of 2 ethical questions going on, and you guys tried to address both of them, but sometimes those get confused. It's like, do you settle, like that part, and then the humane treatment of animals. I think you gotta kind of pick one to address one and get that done, and still you can address, changing your thing going forward as a good business move, which is where you're trying to move it to, like, hey, everyone's going free range. We should be moving this, not because it's ethical, really, because I mean, we're killing chickens for a living. So we're already kind of in a questionable area in a way, but not a questionable area, but no one wants to talk about where their food comes from. So, I think picking one of those was made a little bit more laser focused than kind of juggling these 2, and it allows us to kind of punch holes in them.
I thought it was real good. You're all very well spoken, and I thought you handled the questions about the, the parsing of the verbiage. I wrote down, they are free to roam, and it is a large open shed. We're just not telling people it's crowded. I thought you did a good job of handling that. And I did like the slide. The use of the question at the beginning I thought is compelling because it's persuasive. It gets the person to realize, okay, yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. And so when I end up trying to parse the words, I do feel ridiculous. So I thought that was good. It's interesting, we've been here all day, and it's interesting how some teams choose to handle the table issue. Some people will just sit behind it, that's all they do. Some of them come up and they stand kind of in the well. I think one thing that, and you guys did a good job, you stood up, projected well and all that. I would, you don't want to be reliant on notes, just to emphasize that. But one of the things that gets you once you realize, okay, it's going to be a little scary, but I'm flying without the notes, what that can do for you is it allows you more freedom away from your notes so that you can stand up and kind of get rid of this barrier between you and your audience, which are these tables. Because when you are out here, I think it does end up playing a little more personal. There's a little bit more connection between you and the audience, and I think that gives you more persuasive power. But the other thing I noted is you guys don't even need the notes when you're answering the questions. When you don't even need it. You're really well spoken, so you should just rely on that. You know the material really well. So thank you.
I'm going to make a quick comment. I think you opened very well. I would say an executive level opening. Simple, to the point, informative, right up front. That was very good.
I would echo most of those comments. I really enjoyed the presentation. I enjoyed the topic, because I think it's an important topic, and it does pose dilemmas for companies in advertising, whether it's with respect to chickens or other products. I echo what they say about the notes. I was not sure whether you were reading from some of the notes, but you were looking down too often. And that was distracting for me, trying to listen to things that appeared to be paying more attention to what was on the table in front of you than to the audience that was trying to understand what you were saying. From a substantive standpoint, I thought that the recommendations on the adapting, what the board should do to adapt, was a little weaker than the posing of the reasons for and benefits of settlement. That didn't seem to have as much, the adapting to me didn't seem to have as much behind it. But I do echo also what the other judges have said about the slides, and the first presentation, making the first slide on what do you think pre-grown means. I think that was superb, absolutely superb way of catching our attention. And I, like some of the other judges, are a fan of posing the solution right up front, so we know exactly where you intend to take us, and then you put the reasoning behind that. So I compliment you on the way it was done. The big negative was down to the notes.
So as part of your mission today, that was to persuade us as the board of directors. Our mission was to confuse you, upset you, and we could throw you off your message. We failed. You did a really good job sticking to your message, coming back to it, and that's a tribute to your preparation. So really well done. Agreed. You didn't need the notes. That was a crunch.